I'm the left wing.
Good evening. Welcome to the December 2nd, 2015 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. We have one item under old business tonight, and that is...
Mr. Lamb?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lamb, I would like the world...
I think you're out of order.
I know I am. I would like the world and the staff and the Planning Commission to know it's Bob Lamb's birthday
You're
today.
out of order. Officer, would you escort Mr. Young from the chamber, please?
Can I go?
That is very much out of order, inappropriate, and please disregard those comments. We have one item under old business, and I do mean old. PRD amendment for approximately 91.5 acres located along Veterans Parkway to amend the Sheffield Park PRD. Beezer Homes is the applicant. Mr. Blomley, good evening.
Good evening, Chairman.
Sorry about your Auburn Tigers.
It was a rough weekend. It was a rough season. With that being said, you'll recall that back on the early November meeting, you had held a public hearing for the amendment of the Sheffield Park PRD. I won't go into all the details of the PRD because I think that the main issue at hand was with regards to the amount of parking being provided, specifically the amount of off-street parking being provided, as the applicants were proposing to increase the number of 8,000 square foot lots with 25-foot setbacks, which means that those houses with 25-foot setbacks would not be able to meet the minimum requirement for 4 parking spaces in the driveway. That is the minimum requirement that we would require of all developments that had traditional bulk zoning like RS10, RS12, RS15. However, with a planned development, the applicants have the ability to modify the requirements somewhat. And in the original planned development, the applicant proposed 25-foot front setbacks with the 8,000 square foot lots. So in the currently approved plan, there already were provisions made for 25-foot front setbacks. So not all homes would meet that requirement for 4 parking spaces in the garage, or excuse me, 4 parking spaces in the driveway. The applicants were proposing to increase that number of lots that would have the 25-foot front setback, and the Planning Commission expressed concerns about that. The applicant proposed to alleviate some of those concerns by adding some guest parking areas. However, you'll recall that those guest parking areas were in relatively inconvenient locations throughout the development, and there were really few good places to include those guest parking areas. So after the meeting, staff tasked the applicant and his engineer to go back and be creative and look at ways that they could solve this problem other than just adding the guest parking areas. And Mr. Taylor and his team and Mr. Mulchan with SEC looked at the depth of the 8,000 square foot lots that they were proposing in this plan, and were able to identify actually 56 of the 8,000 square foot lots that they could achieve the 35-foot front setback. So they've eliminated the guest parking areas, but what they've done is they've actually gained parking spaces over the currently approved plan that was approved back in 2013. So while they're adding the additional 8,000 square foot lots, they're actually increasing the number of lots by 11 with the number of lots with the 35-foot front setbacks. So because 56 of those 8,000 square foot lots will require the 35-foot front setbacks. So there's actually a net increase of 22 parking spaces in the development over what's currently approved. In addition to that, I did want to mention that there was an error in the plan book that you had before you last month. The total lot yield remains at 236. However, the plan book erroneously stated that the number of 8,000 square foot lots was increasing from 99 to 141, and that should have read from 97 to 143. And those numbers matched the master plan drawing with the actual numbers. And I believe that was just a typographical error that they were correcting. So with that being said, I'll ask Mr. Rob Mulchan or Mr. Matt Taylor with SEC to add a little bit more detail to what I've said in my presentation.
Good evening, Rob Olson, SEC. As Matthew alluded to, we did go back, look at the plan, reevaluate it based on your comments from the beginning of the month. The plan itself, we were able to, in the northwest corner of the plan, there was a quadrant up there that had some extra depth available in it, so we went back and pushed those to a deeper lot depth that allowed us to get 35-foot setbacks in that little quadrant up there. And then also the main roadway that bisects the southern portion east to west between Weston off to the west and the other side of the neighborhood. That portion there, we were able to actually expand that as well and added some more depth to those lots. So like Matthew said, we picked up more or less 22 additional parking spaces above and beyond what the previous approved plan had already called for.
And if the cable department could bring up the master plan that I've got on the computer, you'll notice that the lots that Mr. Mulchan was talking about were these beige-colored lots here with the asterisks, these two beige-colored lots with the asterisks, and these lots all along this east-west road. All of those 8,000 square foot lots are the ones that they've increased the front setback to 35 feet to accommodate more cars in the driveway.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you working with us on that. Okay, we've seen this before. Any questions or comments from members of the Planning Commission? Are you satisfied with the changes? Is that okay?
I like the changes. I actually like it better than all the little pockets of guest parking that might or might not be convenient to, people that are visiting the different homeowners. So I thought it was a really good solution. Nice job.
Any other comments? Ms. Jones, would you like to make a motion?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve the PRD amendment.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. The motion carries. That concludes the old business portion of our agenda. We have one item under the consent agenda tonight. That is a mandatory referral for the extension of a lease at 1734 South Rutherford. City of Murfreesboro Legal Department is the applicant. If there's anybody on the Planning Commission or any member of the staff or anybody in the audience tonight that'd like this item removed from the consent agenda for further discussion, please indicate. Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion.
Move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Move on to public hearings. We have 3 public hearings scheduled this evening, the first of which is a rezoning application for approximately 3.9 acres located along Otter Trail to be rezoned from RZ to RM16, approximately 2.1 acres, and RM16 to RZ, approximately 1.8 acres. Swanson Development is the applicant. Ms. Green, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, sir. Our first public hearing this evening is for you to consider rezoning one parcel of property which currently has 3 zoning districts on it. The property is located south of Jack Burns Drive, and you can see it on the illustration before you. The property is zoned RZ, that's for zero lot line residential. It's also zoned RM16, that's multifamily residential district, with a density of 16 dwelling units per acre. And a portion of this parcel is zoned CL, that's local commercial district. The properties to the north are zoned RM16. Property to the east across Otter Trail Street is zoned RS15 and is the location of the Overall Creek Elementary School. Property to the west, zoned RS15, is the location of an institutional public assembly. It's the location of a church. The subject property was zoned RZ, RM16, and CL when it was annexed. Since then, they have developed more fully developed a master plan for the property. They now wish to rezone the 2.1 acres from RZ to RM16. And I've got an ortho illustration here, and you can see the property. And then approximately 1.8 acres from RM16 to RZ. If approved, the RM16 property would allow approximately 6 additional dwelling units. Additional units, of course, can be gained based on any types of amenity or some types of amenities that the multifamily project may provide. The Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing prior to making your recommendation to City Council. If you have any questions, staff will be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Okay. Any questions of Ms. Green or the staff before we open the public hearing? Did we have anybody here representing the?
I think Clyde Roundtree's here. He did not make me aware of any kind of presentation.
Okay. Okay. In that case, before I open the public hearing, I'll briefly go over the rules that we conduct our public hearings by if you've not been here before. We'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward to the microphone to speak. If you come forward, please give your name and give your address for the record. Keep your comments no more than 3 minutes, if you would. Make all your questions and comments to the Planning Commission. If you do have questions, the staff will make notes of your questions. We'll try to answer those at the conclusion of the public hearing. All that being said, I'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Nobody? Okay. In that case, I'll close the public hearing. Comments or questions from members of the Planning Commission? If there are none, we're ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion we approve.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The second public hearing this evening is a rezoning application for approximately 3 acres located along Gresham Lane to be rezoned from RS 15 to RM 16. Alcorn Properties is the applicant. Ms. Green.
Thank you, sir. This next public hearing is for you to consider zoning change for 3 parcels of property located along Gresham Lane, and they're located to the east, along the eastern side of Gresham Lane, just east of its intersection with Miranda Drive. The properties are currently zoned RS15, and that's single-family residential district. And the parcels shaded orange are owned by Alcorn Properties, who have requested for those properties to be rezoned from RS15 to RM16, and RM16 is multifamily residential district. The surrounding property is zoned RM16, and the Planning Commission reviewed a site plan for the development of apartment communities on that RM16 property. Property to the north is zoned PCD, that's Planned Commercial District, and is location of Rutherford County complex that owns PAWS and some other types of developments, including the farmers market. Properties to the south are zoned RS15 in single-family residential district and CH, commercial highway district. And just across Gresham Lane are properties in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County that are developed as single-family county subdivisions. The parcel that shaded orange on the map before you was included as additional study area by the Planning Commission, simply to study a larger area so that you can determine what you think might be appropriate to recommend. The Caffey family owned the larger RM16 property, did sell that to a developer who was looking to develop it with apartments. Other members of the Caffey property owned the parcels now owned by David Alcorn. And his plans are either to include it in the larger RM16 development or develop them on their own as standalone multifamily units. And so that parcel, the northernmost parcel that was shaded orange, was not a part of their request, but you decided to study it to consider rezoning that as well. If the parcel to the north were rezoned to multifamily residential district, the current use that exists, which is single family, would be permitted by right. It would not exclude that use, or it would not have any type of requirement to make them change. What I think would be most significant is any design for the properties that are, if they were rezoned, the 2 parcels to the south, they would not be required to provide a landscape buffer between the properties if they're the same zone, but if they're different zones, they would continue to be required to provide a landscape buffer. If the parcels are 1 acre or more in size, then approximately 16 dwelling units per acre would be permitted, and then additional dwelling units could be allowed if they had the appropriate amenities. The Planning Commission should conduct a public hearing before making a recommendation to City Council. We do have representatives of the applicant, Mr. Alcorn, here, and Clyde Roundtree. If you have questions from them, they've not made me aware of any formalized presentation.
Okay. Mr. Roundtree, do you have anything?
members. I'm David Alcorn, and the owners of, at Mrs. Green was talking about of the orange area. I understand as of today, the neighbor next door in the additional study area, Mr. Caffey, I have talked to him a month or so ago when we first decided to go this route, but I understand he couldn't be here today. I know he does have some concerns about the design. I know he's requesting maybe a deferral, although we know that this is, or we think that this is a good use for our property in conjunction with what's around it. We're okay with a short deferral if we need to have some further discussion with Mr. Caffey. So I just want to let you know that. And any questions you have?
Any questions for Mr. Alcorn?
We'll meet again in 2 weeks. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, but we need to have the public hearing.
We need to go ahead and conduct the public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Alcorn.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing at this time and ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Once again, I see nobody coming forward, so I'll close the public hearing. Any questions from members of the Planning Commission?
I just have a comment. I appreciate Mr. Alcorn and his statement and willing to defer it to the next meeting. I guess this is public record for the email that we received, correct? Because you handed it out. That actually Mr. Caffey forwarded to me, and I forwarded on to to Mr. Whitaker. So I think he would at least like to have input. So Mr. Alcorn, I appreciate your action in that. And with that, I make a motion that we defer.
Second.
Motion
To the
made
next
to the next
planning.
meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, do you want to say that, or, because he's specifically asking to be able to come and to speak?
Well,
as
I'm going to ask the staff to meet with him and
Okay.
report back to
All right,
us,
just want to
okay?
make sure we, yeah.
So the motion is made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Mr. Whitaker, if you or somebody on the staff could meet with Mr. Caffey and find out his concerns, report back to us at our next meeting, please.
We'll be happy.
And that'll
Thank you,
give,
sir.
The next meeting is a day meeting. That's the one that you intended.
That's
Okay.
fine. Because we will not have a public hearing there. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the third public hearing today, and that's a PRD amendment for approximately 22.5 acres located east of Cason Lane to amend the Three Rivers PRD. Green Trails LLC is applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. The subject property is located just east of Cason Lane. It's part of the Three Rivers PRD. It's a portion of the Three Rivers PRD called the Gardens at Three Rivers. And it was originally approved to be developed with single-family detached homes on 45 by 30 lots. The overall Gardens at Three Rivers was 33 acres. The request is actually 22.51 acres of that 33 acres. It's the area colored in orange on the map. The Gardens at Three Rivers also included the lots that fronted along Cason Lane and this small portion here. So as you can see, those lots have already been platted, and this unplatted portion here is not included in this particular amendment. Just the area that is colored in orange, which, as I mentioned, is 22.51 acres of the 33-acre Gardens at Three Rivers. The overall Gardens at Three Rivers was approved to be developed with 194 lots. The specific 22.51 acres was approved to be developed with 142 lots. And I'll show you here is the overall approved master plan for the Three Rivers PRD. And the area that I have highlighted in yellow is the area that is a part of this particular rezoning request. As you can see, it has access at 2 points back to Cason Lane, but no connectivity to the south, east, or north. And it is made up entirely of single-family detached lots. And I've also included an excerpt from the existing PRD that denotes the specifics of that portion of the development that I just went over. Here is a very poorly copied sample of the homes that were approved to be developed in 2003 in the Gardens of Three Rivers. The applicant proposes to amend the PRD for a different housing type. These would be attached single-family homes, and the number of units that he is proposing is actually 127 for this 22.51 acres. So it's actually a decrease in the density for this specific 22.5 acres, going down from 142 to 127. But it's a different type of single-family development. As I mentioned, primarily the difference is going from single-family detached homes to single-family attached homes. And Mr. Taylor has a PowerPoint presentation that he would like to go over, detailing the specifics of the development, including the layout and the proposed parking and the architecture for the development. So I'll ask Mr. Taylor to come up and give his presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Taylor.
Same to you, Mr. Lamb, members of the Planning Commission. I am Matt Taylor of SEC here in town, and I've got Mr. Kevin Estes of Green Trails, the applicant on the project, here with me. We'll be happy to answer any questions during the presentation, after, or after the public hearing, whenever you like. So as Mr. Blomley said, this is a portion of the gardens at Three Rivers that was approved back in 2003 originally. It is basically in the center of Three Rivers, about halfway between Highway 99 and what's now Veterans Parkway. It was originally approved for the 142 homes, which is about 6.3 units to the acre on 35-foot wide lots. All these lots were going to be alley loaded, which we've seen a lot of that be changed in the past several years from alley loaded to a more standard front-loaded, or at least come off of a public road. The homes there were a minimum of 1,400 square feet in size. There were no specific amenities to this area. They would be allowed back to the amenities of the larger Three Rivers development, which would have been the pool and some open space areas that are platted throughout. They were going to be part of the larger HOA at Three Rivers, and it would have the underground utilities. Currently, as Mr. Blomley said, a lot of the homes that were along Cason Lane have been built. There was about 12 to 15 lots that were platted but never built upon because some infrastructure never got put in. But other than that, the ones that are platted have been built upon. The infrastructure is stubbed in: water, sewer, roads. The site does drain to the east onto an adjoining farm, and it was actually some more property Mr. Vandershelf had at one time, but has since changed hands. As you can see, it is in the surrounded by other single-family developments. You've got River Downs to the east, River's Edge to the south. Further to the west, past Three Rivers, is Salem Creek and the Woodlands. And then kind of to the northwest, inside of Three Rivers, was the Stonebridge, a age-targeted or age-restricted community. Very similar to what we're proposing here, actually, just a different housing type, I'd say. These are an example of the homes that are built right in front of this property, right along Cason. You can see they front on Cason. All their access comes from the rear. And this is looking from the subject property back toward those homes. There you can see the alley loaded and the garages from the back there. The site itself is pretty much open pasture land. You got a few scattered trees. Mainly the trees are contained to the perimeter of the site. Plan itself, as Mr. Blomley said, we still want to keep the PRD zoning, just want to amend that to allow 127 homes, a decrease of 15 dwelling units on this particular portion of the gardens. That lowers the density in this area to about 5.6 units to the acre. We are proposing two different housing types here. We call them the cottages and the villas. The cottages you should be familiar with from the recently approved Valley Brook development on Compton Road. These are identical to those. Then the villas. You saw the villas a little bit under one proposed plan for Valley Brook. They are essentially a zero lot line type house, very similar to some of what you've seen Decker and Belt do here in town already. The brown or oranges are the cottages. The blue represented on this map here are the villas themselves. All these will go back to be a member of the larger HOA of Three Rivers, but it'll also have its own sub-association that will maintain all the exterior common space, homes, and maintain the landscaping and the grounds throughout. We will maintain underground utilities here as well. These homes will be on individual lots of record, and all these streets will be public streets with sidewalks on both sides. All the driveways have been pushed back, or all the garages have been pushed back to at least 20 feet off the back of the sidewalk to allow cars to park, not only in the driveway, but in the garage itself. We have restricted that the garages cannot be used for storage. They still have to be allowed to have the cars parking in there, and that will be managed and enforced by the HOA. And then, in addition to the driveway and garage spaces, we've got visitor parking spaces spread throughout. We've got a grouping of 12 on the southern side. We've got a nice grouping of about 20 around the clubhouse. And then we've got a couple of about 10 to 15 on the north side of the facility as well. Phasing, we anticipate this to be done in about 4 phases. The first phase would come off the center entrance into the site and would include the clubhouse and a stormwater facility. Each one of these phases is planned to include a mixture of the unit types, so that we're bringing some online each time. The cottages shown here in brown, you can see the majority of those either directly abut the existing alley, which we will be utilizing that existing alley. We've got our garages turned that way, so to present very similar to the way it was going to present before, but with that front facing the street. The rest of those are internal to the site and be really accessed off of internal roads. There are 73 of the cottages, and these, like the rest of Three Rivers, will not have any vinyl siding except for in the trim areas. They'll be all cement board siding, brick, or stone. They are wall 1 story, proposed at a minimum of 1,300 square feet. And they range up to about 1,500 square feet in size. Heavily landscaped throughout. We're classifying them as a rear entry garage. You should recognize these elevations from the Valley Brook project. Decorative architectural garage doors, muted so it's not a strong white color, and really enhanced elevation on that side. And the other side is a nice, clean look with the same high quality materials here as well. The villa is shown here in the blue. Same sort of palette as far as materials go. These do range to 1 and 2 story homes in size. There'll be a minimum of 1,400 square feet in size. These, instead of the 3 to 4 unit buildings like the cottages, these are 2 or 3 unit buildings. Most of these are 2 unit buildings. Again, landscape will be very important to these units as well. We'll again have decorative garage doors and the same palette of materials. Here's a few samples of the building elevations themselves. See a lot of variation in the roof line. There's really not a dull point on these buildings. And again, all these exteriors will be maintained by the HOA. The amenities, the main structured amenity here for these residents would be the clubhouse. We talked about this with Valley Brook. With this age-targeted community, really they're looking for a place to kind of gather and socialize. And this is a relatively small community. This is in the heart of that community, so it'd be very accessible for walking with all the sidewalks, and really create a lot of energy for our development here. And again, the architecture of the clubhouse is going to complement and sample the palette from the rest of the development as well. And we've also planned some community gardens. This is something that my client has used in other developments, been very successful in this age-targeted range and looks forward to bringing to this development as well. Access. Our two main points of access are going to be from Cason Lane. Those are existing points, and we intend to just tie onto those. Unlike the previous plan, we are planning 4 additional stubs to allow better connectivity to our adjoining neighbors. 2 of those are to the north, and 2 of those are to the east. And so whenever those projects are planned, they'll be able to access through our property and us likewise. And all of our streets will be public streets and will meet the subdivision standards as usual. Here we've just outlined a sample of our landscaping. You know, really have trees. They'll be formed to be street trees, but they will all be behind the sidewalk, outside of the right-of-way. And each building will have its own landscape package as it's put in. And again, that will all be maintained by the HOA. Again, I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing, whichever you prefer.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Taylor from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, sir.
I know in here it says the streets are 24 feet wide, I guess, as far as the road surface.
Yes, sir.
I don't see anything that references the alleyway. Do you know how wide the alleyway is?
I believe that is a 20-foot easement, and it is 16 foot of pavement, and it's in place. So we are just connecting to it.
Is that one way?
It really can go both ways. They're just, because of the low volume there, that was the standard then. I think that the city may have actually updated that to be a little bit wider as they've updated their street specs. But for that particular one, that was what was approved then.
Ribbon curbs and automatic lighting on the alleyways?
It is ribbon curbs, and with our garages, we will have, I don't know if it's automatic, but we do have lights at the garage doors. The rest of the development, the public streets will have standard street lights.
We've talked about this on other developments, and I think it'd be consistent if we had some type of automatic lighting coming on those alleyways, public health and safety, especially these dark days that we have this time of year. But something comes on every night where the electricity is maybe paid by the HOA or something, but that would add to the, I think, ambience of that area.
I think we can certainly accommodate that.
Especially the age targeted.
Any other questions before we open the public hearing?
We can look to see what the other homes on that alley are doing and mimic what they're doing as far as if they're doing that for the automatic lighting.
And so to confirm, Chairman Lamb, you're talking about on the existing alley that's already there, having those homes that back up to that alleyway, because the rest of these are all public streets. So we're just talking about that one row, or are you asking?
Well, you'll have lighting on the public streets through
Yes,
there. So, but the alleyway, if there's no illumination on it right now, I think it would.
There are no street lights back there.
And I agree with Mr. Lamb that not to mimic what the other area is doing, but I think we need to make sure that
Well,
there
I'm
is
saying,
lighting.
if they've got the automatic lighting, we'll set it up the same way that they are. If not, we'll come up with a solution.
Yeah, something, not real bright, but something to provide some illumination out there. Illumination. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Taylor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We may bring you back up later. All that being said, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Members of the Planning Commission, I'm Larry Sims. I live at 537 East Main Street. And I'm just here to mention that Bill and Carolyn Waite has 75 acres that joins this property. We've got several large developers looking at it, and I think we're on the north side of where they butt up, and there'll be 2 roads stubbed into the property into the Waite's property. And as you look at this, you might kind of be thinking about Waite and them bringing their property in. We anticipate having about 20 acres of commercial, 20 acres apartments, and the rest of it will be townhouses and some residential housing. So anyway, the kind of ties in with this property. I wanted y'all to be aware of it.
Okay.
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Anybody else? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Questions from members of the Planning Commission?
Matthew, do you feel that the development that will be using these stub streets will be all residential? I mean, Mr. Sims mentioned some commercial development. I have a hard time understanding how you would put commercial back in behind there.
Mr. Smotherman, I'm pulling up the, let's see, I'll go back to the, all right, Mr. Taylor mentioned that there were 2 stubs to the east. That property is zoned RS12. So right now, that property is only zoned for single-family residential purposes. That was a portion of Mr. Vanderschaff's River's Edge development, which was rezoned to RS12 when that the viability of that PRD no longer existed. The property to the north is currently in the county. While I understand that there have been that there may be some interest in that property, or that the owners may be looking to request annexation in the future, to my knowledge, we have not been presented with any kind of zoning plan for that property. Of course, we would evaluate that and look at it with the Salem Pike land use plan, but no formal request has been made on that property, and what is the highest and best zoning for that property, I don't know that I'm prepared to say at this point.
Any other questions? If not, we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion to approve subsidized staff comments.
Second.
Motion is made, and what about the lighting? Are you including that in there?
Including the light.
Okay. Motion is made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Taylor. That concludes our public hearing portion of our agenda. We have staff reports and other business. Mr. Whitaker?
I had none, Chairman.
Mr. Ives? You're kidding. Anything, Mr. Blomley? Ms. Green? Okay. There's no further business. We stand adjourned.